Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome
All right.
to the Art Talks held by the Institute for Australian Chinese Arts and Culture at Western Sydney University. I'm Professor Jing Han, the director of this institute. Before we start, I would like to acknowledge that we are on the unceded land of the Darug people, who are the traditional owners of their land, and pay our respect to the First Nations, elders past, present, and emerging. This Art Talk series covers a wide range of topics, which have attracted many audiences on Zoom and online access afterwards. For all previous talks, we have the recordings on our website. You can watch them at your leisure. They are all very interesting. So today's lecture will touch on a different field. It will look at the inner world of Chinese classic painting, and the speaker, Dr. Richard Wu, is quite unique in his dual roles as a practicing psychiatrist in Sydney and Chinese ink painter, who will be taking us on a journey of discovery, linking Chinese ink art to healing and well-being. Dr. Wu obtained his medical degree at the University of Sydney and qualified as a Fellow of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists. He was the founding director of the psychiatric unit at the Mossman Private School, a private hospital, consultant on the mood disorders unit, Northside Clinic, and the director of the day program, the Northside Clinic. He's a member of the Faculty of Psychotherapy of the Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists. Dr. Richard Wu is also a Chinese ink painter. His research interests include the commonalities between principles of Chinese xieyi, writing mind, literary translation, xieyi painting, creativity, and Western psychotherapy. Dr. Wu has published and presented extensively on this topic at the psychotherapy forums, including World Congress of Psychotherapy, Royal Australian and New Zealand College of Psychiatrists, and International Federation of Psychotherapists. Dr. Wu has also presented topics on xieyi painting at international and Australian art forums, including the Central Academy of Fine Arts in China, the University of Sydney, the National Art School, and Art Gallery of New South Wales. As an artist of contemporary Chinese ink painting, Dr. Wu's work has been shown in solo and group exhibitions at venues including the Art Gallery of New South Wales, Art Asia Expo in Beijing, Art Space 204 in Melbourne, and TWT Art Centre in Sydney. So at the end of Dr. Wu's presentation, we will take questions from the audience. Please post your questions in the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen while Dr. Wu is talking. So now, please welcome Dr. Richard Wu to give his presentation.
Well, that was a very, very comprehensive introduction. Thank you so much, Professor Han. I can go home now with all that introduction. That's my life story. So anyway, thank you so much for joining this talk. And there's actually a lot of material to cover. So if we run over time, please just stop me. So I'll be accepting it very humbly. So anyway, so without further ado, maybe I should just get on with it. And today's topic is about the inner world, or a kind of a therapeutic nature of traditional Chinese classical painting. So firstly, if we just take things back to the very basic reasons of why we create or why we paint. So why do we paint? And what makes us create art? I think it all started with the discovery or the usage of fire, which happened about maybe 500,000 years ago. We started sharing stories by the campfire, and with that, humans developed this enormous prefrontal cortex, which is the site of creativity. And that's what actually propelled us to continue to create, which is a very basic hallmark of being a human. And because we want to share stories, because we want to tell stories at the campfire. So if we look at what makes art enduring, what makes an art important to the community, I think that it happens when the artist shares the same stories or shares elements of the same story with the community. Maybe the community at the time, but sometimes community way after their time. So if we look at what can be shared between the artists and the community, firstly, it's about affirming cultural identity through stories and shared values. Secondly, often it's about just a very simple elemental appreciation of beauty. And thirdly, it's about healing. And if we look at storytelling of Chinese classical painting, if I take you to the very beginning of the very first well-known Chinese artist, Gu Kaizhi, who lived around about 400 AD. And these are illustrations still remaining. This is at the British Museum. And these are tales that tell the virtues of a court lady from Gu Kaizhi about 400 AD, telling stories about values. And this is, again, Gu Kaizhi's paintings about a prince who wrote in the prose of a beautiful prose of his encounter, a fantasy encounter with goddess of Lower River. Moving on, further stories, Tang Dynasty. This is a painting of the second emperor of Tang Dynasty receiving an emissary from Tibet. Moving on, Tang Dynasty again, the glorious Tang Dynasty, the peak of Chinese civilization, one of the peaks. And this is a portrait of two court ladies who were sisters of the favored courtesan of the emperor at the time in Tang Dynasty. The two ladies here riding in the spring, on a spring journey, telling stories about the nobles. Here's another storytelling about how the noble ladies lived in the Tang Dynasty, in the middle of the Tang Dynasty. You can see these gigantic peony flowers on their heads. The painter, this is a close-up, the painter Zhou Fang disappeared at the age of 30 after painting this painting because he was lost in this rebellion of An Lushan in the middle of the Tang Dynasty. Very tragic and very tumultuous time in the Chinese history. And again, this painting is a recording, it tells the tale, again, of the rebellion in the middle of the Tang Dynasty. And the emperor at the time escaped from Xi'an to Sichuan. And here's the emperor in the circle. You can see the three clumps of the horse mane that designated the emperor's horse. So again, storytelling. And you can see from this very simple painting from the middle of the Tang Dynasty, the landscape is only very simply depicted. So landscape at the time was only a backdrop to telling stories. And something important changed with the fall of the Tang Dynasty. And China fell into disintegration. And within 50 years' time, there were 5 dynasties in the Central Plains and 10 smaller kingdoms that reigned the Central Plains. This was a very confusing time, full of treachery, betrayals, rebellions after rebellions. People lost the sense of constancy, and they were looking for something bigger, something healing. So art changed because there was an artist need and the community meeting at the same time for healing. So a new form of art was born, and seeking relationship with nature so that we can rise above losses and traumas. And what came in was Taoism, Taoist philosophy of following nature, man finding that constancy, that eternity that is part of the inner self and nature. So here we have a whole school, sudden burst of a school onto the scene. and of tangible metaphors, painting tangible metaphors of nature to represent man's intangible inner world. So a representative painter was Li Cheng from the 5 dynasties. And this beautiful, elegant mountain scenery was up to this point unseen. And this particular painting is still here today at the, what's that? It's that Nelson Atkins Museum in Kansas City, of all places. And Li Cheng's paintings from the 5 dynasties. And you can tell that it's about nature, man looking up to nature. And this is the birth of the xieyi, or writing mind painting. It's no longer about telling stories or tales. It's about exploring the relationship with nature. It's about healing. So xieyi simply means writing mind, and yi is simply meaning mind. And if you take the word yi apart, it's the heart, the sound of the heart, which represents the inner world. The Chinese believe that all important things come from the heart. So the sound of the heart is one's inner world. And I Ching is what we see in the paintings, the mind scene. Now, the mind scene is not the inner scene, because we cannot tell what actually goes on in a person's inner scene. But the mind scene is an analogical imagery that links the inner scene, the inner world, man's inner world, to the outer, to the elements of nature. So there's a saying, between like and unlike, between like and unlike lies true likeness. So it is in the analogical imagery of the painting that's between like and unlike. So what were people trying to find in these paintings was a direction of returning to nature following the Taoist ideology. So in nature, we'll find what is authentic, what is actually primordial. And here we also see paintings becoming monochromed, ink colors, because following the Taoist philosophy, black or ink color is the origin of all colors. So that goes along with what is really authentic and eternal, the blackness or infinite shades of black. So at the same time, Li Cheng was in the north, but in the south, bursting onto the scene with similar other painters. This is Dong Yuan in the south, and his disciple Ju Ran. These 2 paintings are in the Taiwan's National Palace Museum. So this is about a search for man's place in nature. Then 50 years on, we have the birth of a new dynasty, the great Song dynasty. And I'm beginning with the Northern Song, which spanned 167 years until it was interrupted by invasion by the nomads from the north. And so what has happened to the Song dynasty paintings? We remember the Li Cheng's painting in the 5 dynasties. Well, it progressed onto this. This is a great Fan Kuan's journey into the river mountain. Here we have this lofty mountain, and rising above. The painting itself is over 2 meters tall. So it's actually quite breathtaking standing up looking at it. And here we have these, what's called a raindrop brush strokes, tiny little dots clustering that actually gives the tone of the painting. And and this is where we see nature towering above man. The monolith is this towering representation of mountain in nature. The monolith is like a big slab, big giant stone slab. High, we look up to the monolith, it's high and afar. This is the aspiration of a new birth of a dynasty. And here we also sense the realism in Song dynasty painting. It's very elegant and real, and it depicts the reverence for nature. Then about 100 years on, still in the Northern Song dynasty, a new Emperor Shenzong began his reign, and he started a series of reforms. He was looking for a new theme in painting. So then we have this great painting from that time, Guoxi's early spring painting. It's cleansing, it's refreshing, and that actually represents the mood at the time. Here we have the swirling clouds of the mountains. So they're almost like cloud formations of mountains and crab claw tree branches. That gives a sense of movement, and that is cleansing, which is what the emperor wanted to see. It's again towering nature, and with this sense of movement and cleansing that represents what he wanted to see in his regime. And but unfortunately, his reforms didn't last very well. And after his death, he passed the throne to his eldest son, who only reigned for 7 years and passed away. Then the throne was passed on to this last emperor of the Northern Song dynasty, Huizong. Huizong was an exceptional figure. He was inept as an emperor, a terrible administrator, but he was a great patron of arts and a great artist himself. And under his patronage, the Academy of Realism art flourished, along with porcelain making and music. And he founded the Academy of Painting, and that really highlighted realism of Song painting. And he himself was a great painter. And this painting on the left was by Huizong himself. And he was the first emperor, and in fact, probably one of the very few painters who added calligraphy to painting in the Song dynasty. And his calligraphy is almost iridescent, very sharp. And he wrote in this poem accompanying the painting, "Here I make a vow with art for 1,000 years." And it's a beautiful, elegant painting. But he was a very inept emperor, and through a series of follies in administration and defenses, Northern Song capital Kaifeng was sacked by the nomad Jurchens. And the emperor Huizong briefly passed the throne to his son, who was equally inept. And both Huizong and his son, along with thousands of courtesans, artists, nobles, artisans, were abducted to the north, to Siberia, where they then died one after another over the next 10 years. This was then known as the humiliation of the Jinkang year. And so this is a painting by Li Chang from around that time, depicting the scene. However, Huizong's ninth son then escaped to this beautiful city in the south, Hangzhou. And at Hangzhou, he set up a new dynasty, which became known as the Southern Song dynasty. That went on also for about 150 years. And Hangzhou was this beautiful city that ringed around what is probably like a holy land of Chinese literature and art at the West Lake of Hangzhou. This is a beautiful scene of Hangzhou, it's West Lake. And here, the economy flourished. The Southern Song started trade with about 60 nations at the time through sea routes. And this here is a porcelain from the imperial kiln from the Southern Song dynasty. And tea drinking was also becoming a high art. This is a dragon well tea, a green tea from the Hangzhou region. Art then took on a new dimension. It became much more inner, contemplative, and a reflective healing for the population that were dislocated and experienced tremendous traumas and losses. So there's an old Chinese saying called reflections after trauma, when the first generation is caught up in trauma, they often don't have the time or the space to really explore the trauma. It is often left to the next generation or the next two generations to expand and explore through literature or art. And this is what happened in the Southern Song painting. It was a theme of fragmented mountains, remnant waters. And what do I mean by that? We can see from this great painting by Ma Yuan from the Southern Song. He was born in the Southern Song period in the Hangzhou, great city of Hangzhou, but he carried the transgenerational traumas and hurt and looking for healing. So his paintings were known as Ma's Corner because he often painted these very sharp, spiky corners of the mountains because Southern Song only had a part of the China and only a corner of China. So we see this, his paintings were known as Ma's Corner. You can see this painter or the literati sitting back and looking at the mountains, contemplating, reflecting on this transgenerational trauma. So this is part of a series of 10 paintings collected by Zhu Shaoliang, and it's now in Canada. So at the same time, the contemporary of Ma Yuan was Xia Gui, and Xia Gui's painting was known as Xia's Half. So you have Ma's Corner, Xia's Half, both depicting that sense of fragmentation of the nation, fragmentation of Song. Xia Gui painted this great painting. This is in the National Palace Museum in Taipei. This is called the River Mountain Clear and Afar. It's 9 meters long scroll. So how you look at the scroll from the Southern Song dynasties, you have one row, you have row with the other hand, and you watch it like a movie screen. So there's a shifting gaze, a roving gaze, and this tells the tale of transgenerational grief and healing. And so here we could see these high mountains, spiking mountains of the Northern Song, depicting the high and afar imageries and interposed with the Southern Song's wide and afar, the lakes, the waters that we see in the Southern China that characterizes the sense of being wide and afar. So high and afar, going to wide and afar, interposed between traumas and healing. So to look at it more closely, this is the beginning of this great painting. And you can see these rocks by the Xiagui, known as X-hacked strokes, using circular brush, kind of very brutally striking down, and it carries that sense of trauma, brutality from the invasion of the Jurchens. And we move on. And here we have the old man here in this ring, not a young man looking for wisdom, but an old man going to a temple looking for healing. And through going to the mountain, a temple, the painting moves on to this great expanse of scenery. And one simple description of this is where the brush ends, the mind continues. You have these scattering on and off, sketchy outlines of mountains with a lot of space in between. You know, this is actually almost like the language we encounter in psychotherapy, and which is in psychotherapy, we call it fluttering between words and thoughts. And when a patient is in such a state, they really start to become more and more aware. There's an expanding awareness of the inner world through the fluttering between words and thoughts. We see this beautifully illustrated in the Chinese painting from 800 years ago. it's evocative of the inner scene. We can't always tell what actually happens in the inner scene. It's intangible, but we have these mind scenes that can infer, that can represent the inner scene. So in the language of psychotherapy, Freud talked about the inner scene being free floating. William James, who is also known as the father of psychology in the US, talked about the stream of consciousness. Or Wilfred Bion talked about the reverie of inner world. We see all these beautiful illustrated in this one single painting. So the painting moves on. Now the painting takes the name Plains and Afar. Now it's a scenery covered in the mist, and you will wonder why is it clear when it's shrouded in the mist? That is because the mist removes the details, the minutiae, the constant dwellings, and the world's mundaneness, leaving us just a very purified, very simple, lucid sketch of what is really important in nature. So the mist is covering, yes, but it's also at the same time cleansing. And this is the beauty of the therapy in this painting. And you can almost sense that the painting is slowing us down. It's a lightened ink and it's slowing. And there's lots of space. The space depicts what is beyond the mountains, the sky, the infinite waterways beyond the mountains, but it is also the abyss of our inner world. So moving along is this great painting. So we then suddenly come across this huge cliff. And this is what we often see in traumatized patients as well. It's very hard for a traumatized patient to maintain a constant stream of reverie or consciousness. They are often bombarded by dissociations and traumatic memories. So they've got this double scene going on. One is maybe the therapist in front of them. Maybe that is soothing therapeutic setting, but from time to time, it's the resurgence of trauma coming back up, causing interruptions. And we see that in this great painting as well. So looking at the center part of this painting, we see the analogical mind scene, which is the imagery of the painting, inferring what goes on in one's inner scene. And if we remove this terrible seal from the letter collector, Emperor Qianlong, just take it out, and we get this beautiful vista of what can happen in one's inner scene, in the inner reverie. And it is a light tone that is dispersed in, that tells the story of the inner scene. And the figure of the man is so diminished compared to the peak. Now this painting is only half a meter wide, so these little figurines are smaller than the fingernails. And I think this is a beautiful description actually from William James, the father of psychology, around about a century ago. And he talked about this kind of a drifting gaze in the stream of consciousness. And this is what we have in this great vista depicted in this painting from 800 years ago. And because the tone gets lighter and lighter and going into the yonder, going into beyond the mountains, vanishing into the beyond, there's a sense of integration with nature. So there's something spiritual about this painting as well, without actually identifying God or Buddha. And here again we see these hacked brushstrokes depicting traumatic memories from the last generation. And here we see the juxtapositioning between the sketchy horizontal plains and river scenes and very gentle hills, and the brutal, drastic, packed brushstrokes of the depicting the northern mountains. That interwoven traumas and healing, this is what provides the peace, the healing. And we see these very sharp branches sweeping down, because the literati and the artists of the Southern Song dynasties were very strong characters as well. And they were able to lead armies and fight battles to resist the Manchus and the Mongols. They resisted the Mongol invasion for 40 years. So we see that spirit of defiance depicted also in these tree branches, supple but unyielding, piercing. And in fact, this is also how the tree branches in the West Lake actually looked. They tend to sweep down toward the water. And this is coming towards the end of the painting, where we have the sense of integration. The farmer is coming home now, is homecoming, reaching integration, healing towards that end of life, end of healing and trauma. So a great psychologist of creativity from the 20th century, Howard Gruber, talked about artists coming to the end of life and reaching what he called image of wide scope, where artists often come out with several imageries that depict the whole journey of life in one scene. It doesn't have to be long, doesn't have to be grand, or it could be music. But within these composite paintings, one can see a simulation of a wide range of perceptions, actions, ideas, reminiscent of long ago events, recent events. And there's a sense of integration and understanding or coherence of all these disparate parts coming together. And the Chinese word that can capture all this is liao. And if you look at the complex writing, the original meaning of the word liao, and that's this character here. And we see a vision or eye, this is the eye radical. Liao is visual. Integration and understanding is a visual activity in the Chinese context. And we see a parallel in this great painting at the Museum de Lingerie by Claude Monet. And he wrote this beautiful prose here, poem here. It gives the illusion of an endless whole, of a wave with no horizon and no shore. I mean, this is a kind of the ultimate state of integration as we reach the end of life. You know, we see the whole life coming together as a whole. There's no beginning or end, and no horizon and no shore. Beautifully written by Claude Monet. So what characterizes Chinese painting as opposed to Western paintings of abstractions, realism, is the use of energy tone, or the energy of the brush, the energy of the ink. If xieyi painting, writing mind painting, were a song, I think then the mountains, the rivers, the flowers, the metaphors that we see in the nature are its lyrics. And then the tone of the energy tone of the painting is its music. And there's a prose. Someone asked the last emperor of the Southern Song Kingdom, how much misery do you actually carry? And the king himself was a poet. He said, my misery is like a whole river gushing to the East Sea. And so you can sense that movement as well. And this is how we see the brushstroke of a painting as we have in this imagery. And one single brushstroke is within these fibers, you can see the gushing water. It's almost like a waterfall or river gushing to the sea, but you can sense the strength of misery, the strength of sorrow in the heart. So the energy tone depicts what is inner and what is the music of xieyi painting. And how does this work scientifically? And this is the beauty of it all, because the neuroscience can make sense of it. And what we understand about signals in between brain cells is that we have these chemical neurotransmitters that carries the signals from one nerve cell to another. These chemicals, when there's sufficient synchronicity of firing, going from one neuron to the next, it reaches a certain threshold, and it causes what's called action potential, and we have a fault or command. But you see, these neurotransmitters, they scatter around, radiating out. Lots of them are spreading out across to the other neurons as well. And this is beautifully put together by a neuroscientist, Wolf Singer, about 15 years ago. He said the unsynchronized radiation of threshold signals coming from neurons can evoke associations of perceptions, memories, and feelings in all the neurons around. So with very light ink, with very subtle tonal changes, we can evoke emotions and associations. And we see this in the Song Dynasty paintings, a lot of it, especially in the Southern Song. And here is a scene, I think, that depicts this, illustrates this very, very well. This is actually a painting from a later dynasty, Yuan dynasty, where the artist Nizan lived under the Mongol regime, and where the literati and the painters were very much denigrated and demoted. And he painted this scene with very light and very dried ink. You can see, you can almost sense the dried, light beads of ink, and it highlights this sense of insubstantiality that the literati lived under the Mongol regime. And this is all depicted just from the tone of the painting. And this is coming back to the Southern Song. One of my favorite paintings is at the Metropolitan Museum in New York. Ma Yuan returning to nature. And the tone conveys that sense of melancholia. And this is another painting by Ma Yuan, the Palace of Festivity, where the palace is nestled in nature. The space conveys what is the inner world. This is in the Taipei. Now, if you go to Hangzhou, the beautiful city of Hangzhou, you will see the great West Lake ringed by Buddhist temples, and many of these temples were there from the Song Dynasty, and this is what we see even today. So the city of Hangzhou was the birthplace, I think, of Zen art or Chan art in the Chinese. Here we have the great Liang Kai painting the laughing monk or laughing Buddha, and this painting was done when he was younger. This is housed in the Shanghai Museum, and this when he was getting to his old age, and this is in the Taipei's National Palace Museum. And you can see as he moved along through his decades, there's a freeing of the form and to attain the mind. And in Chinese, I call it 得意忘形, which is normally an insulting comment, but I think it actually also has a great artistic sense. You free the form to attain mind. And we see this as the hallmark of Zen painting, and which carries this fragmented mountains, remnant waters. Things are incomplete, impermanent. There's a sense of desolation, and the characteristics of the paintings are reduced, minimalistic. There's a freeing of the form, and hence it allows us to get through to what is elemental, what is authentic. And this is the character of Chan art or Zen art. And it was actually in the Southern Song Dynasty, this monk from Japan, Moyen Eisai, who studied Zen Buddhism in Hangzhou for 4 years and returned to Japan and founded Zen Buddhism in Japan. He founded this Kenninji, the very first Zen temple in Japan, in Kyoto, which is a beautiful place to visit. And he also brought back the Longjing tea from Hangzhou and started the art of tea ceremony. And he wrote this classic medicinal use of tea. So then the Japanese, through the centuries, have been very busy collecting Chinese paintings of the Southern Song dynasty. Many of the Liang Kai's paintings were now housed in Japan, including these. They're in the Tokyo's National Museum. And what is also regarded as the founding father of Japanese painting was Mushi. Mushi was a Sichuan painter monk in the Southern Song dynasty, almost unheard of in China, but in Japan was highly revered. This is the 6 specimens. Now it's housed in the Daidekuji in Kyoto, and it's a great temple complex. And here we have a sense of awakening. Mushi started with a dark blot of ink and going lighter and lighter and lighter. And then we see this emergence and completion of specimens, the 6 specimens. So there was a sense of beginning with nothing, beginning with not knowing, and there's an awakening. And again, Mushi's painting, also in Kyoto, we have this unrestrained looseness, the reduction of form in Mushi's painting. Very Zen and very Southern Song. Mushi's great scenes of Xiaoxiang Ravine, 8 scenes. There are only 4 remaining now, scattered around Japan. Lighting, evocative space. And this then became the theme of Japanese art and Japanese culture, the impermanence, imperfection that came from the Chinese Chan painting and Chinese Southern Song ethos at the time. The Japanese call it wabi-sabi, designating impermanence and imperfection. And it is, we see the evidence in Japanese meditation, the sitting meditation, Zen paintings, tea ceremony, haikus. And we see this also in the last century, last 150 years, really, many manifestations in Western art, including this great work by Rothko, of course, almost like monolithic again, the giant slab. And we see energy tone expressed in dispersed paint, conveying that sense of movement in very simple slabs. Because what Rothko did was he used turpentine to dilute his paint. So you get this sense of very subtle movements if you look at his work. And horizontal paintings have this tranquility or calmness, whereas vertical has this sort of aspiration towards the heaven. So, and this is almost reminiscent of the great Fan Kuan's work from Northern Song. One is vertical, looking out to nature. One is horizontal, being very contemplative. And Fan Kuan used the scattering of small dots to convey tone. And Rothko used turpentine, diluted layers and layers of paint. And even minimalism has been so ubiquitous in today's designs, even in our iPhone. And if we look at this is iPhone 15 anyway, it almost fits right in the original Northern Song Fan Kuan's monolithic mountain. So then we have this tyranny of literati painters that came under the Mongol regime, which annihilated the southern Song in 1279. Kublai Khan was the very enlightened emperor from the Yuan dynasty. He hired this artist literati to a high office called Zhao Mengfu, and Zhao Mengfu was then became also the cultural leader at the time, and he very much emphasized following ancient masters, and by that he means Tang and Northern Song. And because there was a threat that the Mongols were going to eradicate or annihilate the whole Han and Song, the Han race and the Song culture, so there was a great need to preserve what is old, what is traditional, and so Zhao Mengfu emphasized this sense of painting as extensions of calligraphy, and and because he was a royal descendant of the royal blood from Southern Song, there was a real need for him to distance himself from Southern Song art and culture, because he was in a very precarious position politically. So it was a denigration of Southern Song artists from his time onwards. And the tone, the layering, the use of side brush strokes that was so beautifully developed in the Southern Song was now then abandoned because of the tyranny of literati painting. And the Southern Song artworks were seen as lacking old masters, as in Tang and Northern Song, old masters' elegance, old masters' teachings, and were marginalized ever since. So Zhao Mengfu said, artwork is pointless without masters' teachings. And in subsequent dynasties, there were many manuals of painting telling us how to paint, and including this great manual of the Master Seed Garden from the Qing dynasty. And I call this sort of painting by prototypes. And what I mean is that you have this glossary of how you should paint. If you're painting figures, you're supposed to pick these particular configurations. This is from the Yuan dynasty onwards. Oh, this is how you're supposed to paint figures. And if you're painting trees, you're supposed to follow these prototypes according to the manuals, according to Zhao Mengfu's literati painting school. So by the time it reached the early Qing dynasty, we had this sort of painting that is rather really very stifling. And the 4 Wang masters of early Qing dynasty, you can't really tell them apart, really. And so I call it the xieyi painting having lost its mind. So coming to the 21st century, what do we do? And how do we carry this forth to meet today's needs? How do we find this communion between the community needs and the artist's needs, my needs versus community's needs? Well, because I think today's world, we are confronted with disconnection, alienation, as we can see in this photograph here. We are totally immersed in our own worlds, even though we're sitting next to one another. And there's a sense of the individuals becoming irrelevant. So the question we now encounter is, who am I? Who am I not? And so there's a need for cultural identity and cultural continuity. We are our past accumulated. We're not suddenly born out of the blue and suddenly disappear. I think I'm 1,000 years old from the Song dynasties to now. So my painting, my art is not just about reflecting the here and now. And and the Song dynasty, and I think this is what I try to do, and the art should be elevating, providing a sense of solace and healing. And it should be searching for something that connects our inner world with nature and helping us to work out, who am I not? And connecting up with our past, because our past is our story. So I have no shame in still using the Chinese ink brush, Chinese ink paintings. That is the continuity, my story, our story, and our story. And let's just get the calligraphy out of the way, the literati got out of the way. This is my my calligraphy of writing mind of xieyi. And this is following nature. Following nature is the spirit of Taoism, non-interference. So this is about responding to what feels right. And therefore, we discover what is authentic. We're not born with knowing what authenticity is. We're not born knowing what we are, who we are. And the self-discovery is something that happens over time of reduction after reduction, losing form to attain the mind. So it is through responding to what feels right, and that we discover what is authentic. So this is how I paint. And sometimes I do 4 or 5 paintings together. And so the initial parts of the painting may be quite accidental, but then it is allowing the paintings to become themselves and what each painting feels like when I come to that surface. So there's a sense of encountering the encounter between seeing what is in front of me and the mind. So the Chinese call it the play of ink, by just painting what you feel right. And in the language of psychotherapy, this is a language of play, which is beautifully described by a Russian linguist, psychotherapist, Lev Vygotsky. And he spoke of the words, the earlier words in sentences in the language of play are contained within words of the latter, but also influence the words of latter. So you keep responding to yourself, to your own language, you keep responding to your own painting as you go. And there's a sense of therefore becoming, therefore there's an unfolding. So these paintings over time develop into more formed sceneries of ripples and mountain streams. And because they are their own individuals, becoming their own individuals. And old paintings, I'm very comfortable living in the Song Dynasty in the present. And here, this calligraphy says, the old fool, that's me, living amongst immortals. And my immortals are my paintings. They fit beautifully with modern furniture. And I call myself a contemporary Song Dynasty painter, which is oxymoron of terms, Song Dynasty being 900 years ago, but it's also contemporized. This is me, somewhat younger, about 5-10 years younger. And here I take this theme of light tone, move away from the tyranny of literati painters, just using tone, the Southern Song techniques, and I call it a dawn bell. You can see the shimmering dawn coming through, and you can almost hear the sound of the temple bell. This is painting space, painting the horizontal space, the healing. This will be a contemporary literati painter's imagery of waterfall, using the center part of the brush, because that's what calligraphers use. And this is what I use, using the Southern Song's light side brush, using the tonal work. So it conveys the sense of being light and afar. And so through the light energy, it's cleansing, and it gives us the real sense of real texture of nature. And being very far, this waterfall looking from afar. And this is my using tone to depict the blue mountains. I call it the blue mountains mist. And there's a great saying, when when the brushwork is no longer brushwork, when the ink is no longer ink, that's where I really am. And with the energy tone, light energy tone, you can almost hear sound. And I call this painting listening to the rain in the banana forest. And the tone can be harsh, can be masculine, depicting an imagery like this, a swordsman with the power and the concentration of energy. This is a close-up of the swordsman with very strong, bold use of ink tone. But it could also be very light and very sketchy, very suggestive, and very feminine. This is a portrayal of a talented Lin Huiying, a poetess and architect who lived about a century ago. This is a light use of ink, depicting a lotus which has a symbol of rising above mud and not painted. This is a heavier use of ink, a different feeling of lotus altogether. And you can also slow down the painting. And the closest word I can find is adagio, by slowing down the strong, bold ink line and juxtaposing that with horizontal light ink. So there's a sense of slowing down and being light and plain. So you can have this one single ripple emerging from the top of the pond. So you have this momentary ripple on the surface of the pond, and what is vertical is also the infinite reflections, momentary ripples and infinite reflections. So my take on Chan art or Zen Buddhist art, I think Zen art, Zen meditation is a struggle with desires and attachments. And so this is a painting about meditating amongst wild forms. And Bodhidharma was the founder of Zen Buddhism, and he was a very proud man, I think too arrogant. And this is about Bodhidharma not happy. And because he was so arrogant, he couldn't get along with anyone. So he went to the northern China, across the Yangtze River on a single blade of weed. So the legend went, and founded the Shaolin Temple. And this is the greed of the monk, the 7 deadly sins, I suppose, the desires and attachment. And you can see the greedy, the menacing eye, big bowl in front of the monk. And the gluttony of the monk. The monk is about to jump over the fence because of the smell of a lovely meat stew from the neighbors. And this is a close-up of the monk about to give in to greed and gluttony. This is today's sin, addiction to the iPhone. So the term is idle hermit, but if you add the sickness radical to the hermit, it becomes the word for addiction. And doubts is another attachment or weakness that we struggle with. And the saying is, do I still want to continue to be a monk or a therapist? And so it's about quietening down and contemplating and meditating. The two seals, one says who is Wu, and one says who is not Wu. And the technique is reduction of the brush strokes. And we come to a sudden epiphany of Zen awareness, beginning with not knowing where the eyes are, in the cheeks somewhere, and deeply shut, to a slit that's almost still asleep, observing the inner world, to suddenly opening the eyes. Here we can see the glitter in the eye, and there's almost a smile. And so this is the epiphany, the southern school of Zen Buddhism. And this, but I think as a therapist, what is really important to really changing human nature is a slow cultivation and slow enlightenment over time. And here's a painting that I did of reflecting the waterfall. It's a slow incremental cultivation, slow incrementing enlightenment, slow practice of changing over time. That's how we really change our nature. And so that we come to the sense of laughing at all that there is to laugh and accepting all that there is to accept. And so then eventually we come to, this is my reckoning of what is important with enlightenment. And when we forgo actions, we see thoughts. When we forgo thoughts, we see observations. And a lot of mindfulness is about observation. And when we forgo observation, we see I. And when we forgo I, we see Buddha. In other words, we see enlightenment. And so in the beginning, mountains are mountains, and then we go through a stage where we no longer see the mountains in mountains, but eventually we see mountains still as mountains. And this is about the end of life, depicting an old monk looking back, smiling with a kind of a reassuring smile as he approaches the end of life. And the end of life is also the state of nirvana, the ultimate completion, the completion of the circle of life. And there's this reassuring look from the old monk as he approaches it. And this is the circle of life. Well, my life is not ended yet, so it's not complete. And sometimes I think animals have meditations, cat naps. Cats have very light naps, and they easily awaken. So it's almost cat napping. And I can go on and on about my take on the Song Dynasty painters and Northern Song and Southern Song, but I think we're out of time now, aren't we? And so, Sabi, where do I go from here?
Richard, thank you so much. I think that was an absolutely fabulous talk. I thank you for taking us on this incredible, rich journey through not only the history of Chinese sort of traditional paintings, but also through your paintings and showing us your artwork. Could you stop sharing your screen so we can actually see you now? That would be great. And then that's nice. There we go.
That's for me.
So Richard, we really have run out of time, but I would like to ask you a question.
Yes.
I'm very interested in how you kind of put together this whole passion of yours for art with your psychiatric practice, if you like, and how you use that in healing with your patients. Do you get them to look at the artworks? Do you talk about the artworks, or do you actually get them to physically practice some calligraphy, some artwork? Maybe you can just
great question, Sally. How I came to be, I guess, who I am. I think it's a series of follies and mistakes and wrong decisions and following my parents' expectations. But I guess it's what Steve Jobs talked about as scattering the dots. When you scatter the dots, initially you don't know where it's going to go. And eventually, when you've lived long enough, you realize things don't come together. The dots are connected. And so that my passion for art has been there since my father, since my, well, not my grandfather, but my father. It's transgenerational. And I myself being, my father, I was an immigrant from China to Taiwan, and I'm an immigrant from Taiwan to here. So the transgeneration dislocation I experienced myself. And being a doctor, I guess, was following my father and my parents' commands. But then I found psychiatry and listening to the psychotherapeutic lectures. I found, my goodness me, that is actually talking about Chinese art. And so it's a big circle, round circle. And what do I do with patients? Well, look, I don't force this on patients. And sometimes, often you get a sense that they are arriving at this imagery, and they are at the point of almost talking about what these paintings are talking about. It is capturing those moments that you say, hey, by the way, you can find what what you're talking about visually in Chinese painting, I do show them the books or the computer versions of these great painters' works, and often it's very moving. It's very moving when they see them, and I also sometimes hang. Well, I do have some of my paintings hung in my practice, so sometimes they resonate with that and they talk about it, and therefore it goes on to them. But I don't force it on people. I think it is kind of the Buddhists talk about yuanfen. Although I'm not a Buddhist, but it's about fate. It's whether they actually have that seedling, that seeds connect. You can sense, and you talk about it. And yes, I do get those patients who are so inclined to do drawings, and my technique, my tool for them is actually pencil. The Chinese brush is something that's very foreign to today's Australian patients. So pencils is very usable, very easy. And Paul Klee talked about taking a pencil for a walk. So that's the meandering, the freedom, the loosening, and allowing for symbolisms and metaphors to emerge. And when those patients who are so inclined get into this using of the drawing, either during the session or at home, and it is a powerful reference to psychological, psychotherapeutic discussions. And often for years, the metaphors keep coming back, what they put together visually. It's very powerful, but I don't force it on people. I think it's whether people show me, oh, they have actually said this is what they want to do, and I use it.
And I find it very fascinating that, I don't think I'll ever be able to look at a classical Chinese painting again without looking for those hidden meanings. I looked at it before and saw beauty. I looked at the aesthetics, but you've talked about, intergenerational trauma, and, you've looked at the way that painters may have been interpreting their own inner world. And that is so fascinating. And I wondered how you kind of made that connection. You've been obviously studying this for a long time, but that connection is so interesting, how you came across that and how you worked that out.
So, if there was a crystallizing moment, it was actually when I listened to Professor Russell Mears' talks on psychotherapy, self-psychology, when I was still going through training as a registrar in hospitals. And so Russell is retired, but he was a professor of psychiatry at University of Sydney. And I think we're very blessed in Australia to have such a great figure leading psychiatry or psychotherapy. And like I said, what he talked about was literally an analysis of Chinese ink painting. Which is something that I guess I had always had an interest for as a child. And I grew up with it because my father was a historian and a painter as well. And it was a scintillating moment when I hear the psychotherapist's lecture talking as if he was talking about Chinese painting. Absolutely electrifying. And so that's something that I guess has still continued to move me even now. After
it obviously resonated with you, and that was your kind of, as you say, electrifying moment.
Yes. Russell's still alive, and I should still thank him. Yeah.
Well, that's fabulous. I would love to go on talking about this topic for a long time because it is really, truly fascinating. But I'm so glad that we were able to get you today to come and give this talk. And I really thank you for the time and all the work you put into producing those beautiful slides and going through each one in such detail. It was really, really fascinating.
Again, I'll tell you more about my other paintings.
Next time, we'll have to have you to talk more about your paintings. Exactly.
Oh,
but that was
my pleasure. My pleasure.
We haven't had any questions come in, so I am going to assume that people have learned much from you, and they're hopefully, they'll want to go on and explore this topic further. But we have recorded this, so I'll be sending out this video to everybody who registered. So everybody will get a chance to look at it again and listen again and learn more. And I truly thank you for participating today in our art talks. Yes. And we look forward to having you on again with another topic in the future.
Absolute pleasure. And thank you for hosting it, Sally.
You're very, very welcome. And in the meantime, for the next art talk, we will send out our, a notice. It'll probably be sometime, I think in August, we've got My China story happening. The art talk, the next one will probably be in September, but we'll let everybody know in due course. And thank you all for participating, for listening to this fascinating topic. And we all thank you very much, Richard, for giving us your time today. So thank you again. Good evening to everybody. Have a great night and see you all again. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.